The Chundawats were a family of 11, residing in the Burari area of Delhi. The entire family lived together in a two-story home, and the family ran a grocery store and plywood business in the area. The Chundawats was a respected family in the community. But one day, this big family stunned not only everyone in their community, but the whole of India as well. On July 1st, 2018, at around 7:15 a.m., a neighbor of the Chundawats, Gurcharan Singh, who used to go on morning walks with Lalit, noticed he was not present for their walk. And he also noticed that the family grocery store was not open. This was odd, considering they were rather punctual and usually opened their store at 5 a.m. Concerned, he went to visit the family to make sure that everything was okay. He found the door to the house left open. He walked inside and discovered the family in the courtyard, hung by the neck and deceased, save Narayani Devi, who was found in another room. She appeared to have been strangled. Startled, Gurcharan Singh alerted the police, who arrived at the scene and were as baffled as everyone else. The family had their hands tied behind their backs with tape, their whole heads covered with cloth from a single bedsheet, their mouths covered in tape, and their ears stuffed with cotton. With the details the police had observed, they first investigated the incident as murder. They had the theory that the incident was a targeted killing by a criminal group. But the family did not have any known enemies, nor was the family involved in any illicit business. Upon further investigation, there was no sign of any struggle, and it seemed as though the family had willingly done this. The whole incident had the investigators stumped, until they found one piece of vital evidence: the diary of Lalit Chandawat, which had writings going back 11 years, not long after the death of his father, Gopal Singh. In his diary, Lalit had written about the spirit of his late father, who had been communicating with him, and had given him instructions on multiple rituals, or kriya. Joint Commissioner of Police Alok Kumar stated, "We have found handwritten notes detailing how hands and legs are to be tied, and are quite similar to the manner in which the bodies of the 10 people were found. They are exhaustive notes, and we are studying them." Details written in the diary match how the bodies were found, hung in batches of 3, as well as detailing on how Narayani Devi, the matriarch of the family, could not stand, and hence should be laying on the floor, which was consistent with the findings. All these findings led police to the logical conclusion that the mastermind of this incident was Lalit himself, and the family was not opposed to performing this kriya. Chillingly, the diary also had a small passage pertaining to the incident. Everyone will tie their own hands, and when the kriya is done, then everyone will help each other untie their hands. This indicated the family was not expecting to die, and all were willing participants. The date was 2000, the 31st of December, in the eve of the new year. Harika, the mother of one Yasko Miyazaba, calls her daughter to celebrate the occasion and exchange pleasantries. Strangely, she notices She cannot call her daughter at all. The Miyazawa family, like most, are up and about at 10 a.m. and her daughter runs a cram school at home, so she should be there. Bothered by this, Haruka steps outside to go to their house instead. They do live very close by, so it wasn't much of an issue for her. As she opened the front door of the Miyazawa household, she encountered what can only be described as a bloodbath. Near the stairs, she saw her son-in-law, Mikio Miyazawa, lying in a pool of his own blood. Horrified, she calls the police immediately, and thus begins the most cryptic, strangest cases in Japanese history. The Miyazawa family consisted of 4 members. Mikio Miyazawa was 44 years old and the patriarch of the family. He was an employee of London-based marketing firm Interbrand. His role at the company was unspecified, but it was a multinational company with a presence in over 20 countries. It majorly dealt with marketing campaigns for other companies like Nissan, Microsoft, Xerox, and others. Yasuko was Mikio's wife and was 41 years old at the time of her death. The kind and compassionate mother of 2, she put all her attention into caring for her beloved children. Nina, the only daughter of the family, and the firstborn among the 2 children. Nina was 8 years old and in 2nd grade. She was described as a typical little girl who was playful and fun. She enjoyed soccer and ballet. 6-year-old Rei was the youngest family of the Miyazawa household. He had a speech impediment, and his situation stressed the family. They had sought professional help for his condition and devoted most of their attention to ensuring he felt loved. 3 of the family members were killed by bladed weapons, a sashimi knife that the killer had used to kill Mikio, and a knife from the house itself to kill Yasuko and Nina. Rei was the only one to be killed by a different method, namely strangulation. As the police gathered evidence, they had a rough idea of what happened on that fateful night. On the 30th of December, the Miyazawa household returned from shopping and had dinner. After the family had dinner, they prepared to head to bed at around 10 p.m. or later. An unidentified individual entered from the 2nd floor window that led to the bathroom. Right next to the bathroom was Rei Miyazawa's room. The perp entered the room and strangled Rei in his bed. Hearing a commotion upstairs, Mikio, who at the time was on his computer working, walked upstairs to see what was wrong. When he went upstairs and into Rei's room, he saw the perp standing over his son, with his hands on the child's neck. A struggle ensued. During the struggle, the perp's hand was supposedly injured, as evidenced by the blood that did not match anyone in the household. But Mikio could not fight off his attacker for much longer, as he was stabbed trying to flee down the stairs, and finally lost his life, with his body being found right by the first step. As all of this was happening, Yasko and Nina were sleeping in the attic. The commotion finally woke them up. Soon, the perp lowered the ladder to the attic and attacked the last remaining members of the family. But he had damaged and broken his sashimi knife, so he wasn't able to finish the job. He then casually went down the ladder to retrieve a knife from the family's kitchen. It's speculated that Nina and Yasko brought the ladder up and tended to their wounds, while the killer lay awake downstairs. They tried calling for help, but by this time the perp had already cut the phone lines. They were trapped in their own home, with no way to escape, as the perp constantly tried to get into the attic. Eventually, the killer finally broke through and ended the lives of Nina and Yasko. Notably, he was much more violent in this act than he was with the males of the family. After he ended the lives of the entire family, you would think the perp would flee. But instead he did something that makes this case even darker. He stayed at their home long after he had slain the family. There's evidence he ate ice cream from the family's fridge, drank beverages, and used the family computer. He even used the bathroom. The perp also left behind a ton of evidence, from his complete attire and accessories to his blood, saliva, and hair. With all of this evidence at hand, the Japanese police were confident that they could track down the perp who did this quickly. But that's the thing. Even with all of this evidence, tracking down the perp was next to impossible. The DNA was almost of no use, as the perp was not in any kind of criminal record. The clothes the perp had were tracked down, but again, this evidence led nowhere. The most seemingly useful piece of evidence was the perp's sweater. Only 130 were sold in Japan, and one was even sold near the district the murders took place in. But again, nothing. The strangest piece of evidence in this whole case was some sand found at the scene of the crime. Specifically, the bag the killer had with him. Now some dirt would be innocuous compared to all the other evidence present at the scene. But when the sand was analyzed, it threw investigators for a loop. The sand was from California, but not from anywhere in California, but Edwards Air Force Base. Investigators had no idea how some sand from a US Army base could ever end up in Japan. If the perp had gotten it while he was at the base, it would be easy to identify him, because his DNA would be flagged. But like with other pieces of evidence, this led nowhere, though there is one lead that could lead to something. On December 31st, around 67 hours after the bodies of the family were discovered, a man was treated for a wound on his hand, almost 100 kilometers away. The wound was described as being deep enough to see bone. The man had his wound treated, not giving any details, and he was never heard from again. With our last entry, we'll be looking at the case of Pakistan's most infamous serial killer. Our story begins in the city of Lahore, which this killer used as a hunting ground. Javed Iqbal was born in the 1950s. the seventh child in his family and the youngest son. He was adored by his mother, and Javed loved her as any good son would. He had a relatively normal childhood, with his father being a well-off trader. He was given an excellent education during his high school and college days. And after his graduation, his father bought him a villa to start his own business in and as a place of residence. All was looking well for Javed, but unknown to his own family, he was hiding a darker aspect of him, a dark impulse to control and use the less unfortunate. And his main target for his sickening desires were orphan boys, all of whom were underage. He often scoured the streets of Lahore for young boys who begged on the streets and bringing them to his home, often showering them with gifts such as toys and brand new clothes, along with the best street food around. He did this for days on end, often gaining their trust. Once these boys started to trust him, then he would reveal his dark intentions. Javed Iqbal abused those boys with impunity, and the abuse would last for weeks on end. Some he would even chain in his house. With no family to look for them, they had nowhere to go and were resigned to their fate. Until one day, a family member visited Javed in his home, where he would notice the boys. Alarmed with their living conditions, he informed the police, which after confronting him in his home, arrested him with charges of abuse. He was brought to court, and he was given a sentence of a measly 6 months, which he served without much issue. But during those 6 months, Javed's mother passed away due to a heart attack, guessed to be caused by the imprisonment of her beloved son and the discovery of his crimes. After Javed Iqbal learned about the passing of his beloved mother, this monster lost his very last shred of humanity. His anger led him to plan out a year-long crusade against society itself, in which 100 lives would be lost. Javed Iqbal once again started preying on his usual victims with the same methods he used with his previous, but with a very different intention. He lured his new victims to his home, gave them shelter, bought them new clothes, toys, and getting to know his victims and journaling details about them. And then he would snuff out their lives in the same place. He repeated this process with all of his victims, journaling details about their lives and killing each and every one of them. After a year of him freely murdering children in his demented crusade, he finally sent out a letter to the police where he confessed to his crimes. But amazingly, the police at first ignored it. But Javed then sent it out to several news stations and newspapers. They dug into his claims of killing 100 people, and chillingly found he was not lying nor exaggerating the number of his victims. They forwarded their findings to the police, where they finally took action, raiding Javed Iqbal's home, where they found what can only be described as something out of a horror movie. Chains and ropes littered his home, which had human tissue on them from several victims. As police investigated his home, they established his modus operandi. He would lure his victims into his home, and after journaling their lives, he would strangle them with chains and ropes, whilst they slept on the beds he provided. And after he had snuffed their lives out David would write again in his journal and would write down one more detail: the number of his victim. This is the reason he was believed to have killed 100 children. He had details about their lives, taking their photos, and finally added the number of his victims once the deed was done. And finally, dissolving their bodies in barrels of acid. When the police came to arrest him, he was nowhere to be seen, which started a citywide manhunt. Finally, he was captured 2 days later. And after his imprisonment, followed a speedy trial, which was a media circus, with the infamous serial killer becoming an unsettling household name. The judge presiding over the case sentenced Javed Iqbal to death, with his death mirroring those of his victims. He was to be strangled by chains, his body dismembered, and finally dissolved in acid. But this brutal sentence was refused to be carried out by officials, with Javed still being on death row, with his execution date being unknown. But before his actual execution could be carried out, Javed Iqbal was found in a cell, dead, hanging from the ceiling fan, along with his accomplice. It was not known if Javed Iqbal had ended his own life, or was it the act of an angry prison guard who wanted some sort of justice. Whatever the case, the life of this sick individual ended after he had taken away 100 others.